Welcome to the Joy Lab podcast, where we help you uncover and foster your most joyful self. Your hosts, Dr. Henry Emmons and Dr. Amy Prasek, bring you the ideal mix of soulful and scientifically sound tools to spark your joy, even when it feels dark. When you're ready to experiment with more joy, combine this podcast with the full Joy Lab program over at joylab.coach.
Hello, I'm Henry Emmons, and welcome to Joy Lab.
And I'm Amy Prasek. So here at Joy Lab, we infuse science with soul to help you build your resilience and uncover your joy. Now, if you caught episode 109, we shared our new podcast schedule with our Saturday episodes. And most often, those episodes will fall into this resilience lab space where we'll talk more about resilience, like lifestyle medicine, mental health issues also that need more attention, that need less stigma, and that need more of a spotlight on some empowering ways to help us feel better and tap into our resilience. So that's kind of the focus of these Saturday episodes, as best as we can do to stay on track, on topic. We may veer here and there. But in this episode, we're going to talk about anxiety attacks and panic attacks and the differences and similarities. And to sort of get us started here, I want to note just a few things. The term anxiety attack and then term panic attack, they're usually often used interchangeably. I kind of do. Maybe a helpful note here is that anxiety attack isn't a clinical term, so there's not really like a definition, whereas panic attacks certainly are. And panic attacks are really common. About 40% of folks, at least in the US, will experience one in their lifetime. I also think that there's nothing wrong with sort of interchanging the panic attack, anxiety attack language, but I think that distinguishing between panic attacks and anxiety can be really helpful. We'll do a little of that in this episode. And it's important to note that both anxiety and panic attacks can be helped with treatment.
Yeah, well, it's certainly easy to see why there is some confusion about this, because they're both very common part of our language nowadays. They're used frequently. They're used loosely, I'd say, both by clinicians and the general public. And you know, there, as you said, there is a ton of overlap. They both stem from our kind of anxiety/alarm system. You know, we have this built-in mechanism for vigilance, for scanning for danger, kind of keeping our eyes on the horizon, so to speak. And it's worth saying that this is an evolutionary advantage in a sense. It's a good thing that some of us are just a lot more prone to this. You know, if you imagine our far ancestors, it would be really good to have somebody in the tribe who's paying attention, you know, who sees the danger coming, whereas, you know, the rest of us can be sort of
playing Scrabble or something.
Not noticing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, point being that we are wired differently in that regard. And some of us are much more prone to it than others, and therefore also more prone for something to go wrong. The way I think of an anxiety attack is that someone is just trying to convey that they experienced unusually intense, bad anxiety over a period of time. Whereas I learned to think about a panic attack as a very discrete, almost always very short period of time of the kind of an anxiety that is so intense that you really do fear that you are going to die from it. It is all systems go. Everything is opened up to allow in this sense of fear that something awful is about to happen. Yeah. And, you know, physiologically, there are a lot of similarities, but there also are some differences.
The term alarm system helps me. I think of when between sort of an anxiety attack or high-level anxiety, vigilance, and a panic attack, when you have to arm a house or a building or something and you set the code and you have like 2 minutes to get out, I get really anxious during those 2 minutes where you're like, oh God, where's my jacket, my purse? But then there's that next part where if you don't get out, that alarm hits. And if that alarm hits, I crumble. I just freeze. So for me, it's sort of like, that anxiety attack, that high level anxiety, you can kind of still function in. It can be really difficult. When that alarm hits and it's just all consuming, it's the only thing you can hear. It's really hard to function. And that's kind of a panic attack in my perspective.
Well, that what you just described is another kind of nice way of distinguishing them, because your own experience of becoming anxious in that circumstance was clearly related to some stressor in your environment. Something happened outside of you that kind of set off your own miniature alarm bells. And that's another way of distinguishing, because a lot of times what we refer to as anxiety attacks are stress related. They are triggered by something going on, either within us or usually outside of us. And that's not always the case with panic attacks. The way I think of it, somebody who has what we call panic disorder, where they're having fairly frequent of these intense episodes, it is almost always genetic in nature, at least to some extent, and it is very strongly biological. And sometimes it happens totally out of the blue. There is no apparent trigger whatsoever. So to me, it's almost like, that home security system you were describing has gone rogue. It's just doing its own thing, regardless of the fact that there is no danger in the vicinity. There's no trigger. Nobody's trying to break in, but the alarm system is set too sensitively, or something wrong with the monitoring system or whatever. It's no longer a normal response to something that's happening. Whereas, for the vast majority of folks who are struggling with anxiety, even if it's pretty severe anxiety, it is stress related to one degree or another.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. I'll share my experience because it speaks exactly to what you're saying there, Henry. So when I was in my early 20s, I had several panic attacks. And I remember that first one like it was this morning. I was driving on the Pacific Coast Highway. I was actually feeling pretty good. I was coming around a bend. I could see the ocean on my left. It was kind of peaceful. And then, literally out of nowhere, just this wave of terror came over me. Mm-hmm. Something I had just never experienced before. And I'm sure those of you who have experienced before can completely relate. You have this unexplainable, overwhelming sense of dread. And generally, I can push through this kind of stuff like anxiety. Like I was saying, I can gather up my jacket and purse and get out of the door. But here, I could not function. I pulled over and I just had to sit there for several minutes, which felt like hours, until it receded. It did recede, and there was nothing I could do to assist it at that moment. I just had to wait for it to finish. And I guess in some ways I was kind of lucky because I knew what had happened, at least after it ended. After I realized I was still alive in the car, I didn't have a heart attack, which is something that often gets misinterpreted for panic attacks as well. But after it was over, I realized, okay, wow, that was a panic attack. I'd read about these things. And for me, actually, that panic attack was sort of a clear sign that my body was holding on to stuff that I needed to work through. At least that's what I thought, that this unconscious, uncontrollable panic was like a volcano eruption. It wasn't my fault. I'm not saying that at all. But there was something there. To me, it was sort of this evidence that I needed some help, actually, to figure out how to make my way out of anxiety and depression. That was the message I received. And I'm grateful I was able to do that work and haven't had panic attacks in 20 years now. So they certainly can be cared for. They can be treated. You can move beyond them. Mm-hmm. And maybe they are telling a story. At least, again, that's what my experience was. Like there was a lot of molten in me. There was a lot of energy, a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings that I maybe couldn't name, that I didn't understand, but that certainly needed some care, that needed some attention, so that they could make their way out if I was, going to do this work, so that they could make their way out in a way that wasn't so explosive, either individually, like manifesting as a panic attack, or even outwardly, and which is not really a wild thing to say. There's a lot of evidence that folks with anxiety disorders will also have what are called anger attacks, which is just exploding at folks, or impulsive aggression. So maybe we could change this episode to anxiety attacks versus panic attacks versus anger attacks. But it's interesting how all of these things really relate.
They do. And, I think one of the things you're getting at is that sometimes there is just so much energy in our system, in our poor little bodies. There's so much extra activation, movement, that it just has to get out in some way or another.
100%. That's exactly how I felt. There was just
Yeah.
too much. It needed a way out. And there was nobody out in my car for me to have some impulsive anger at.
Well, a couple of things that you did, that you described, I think are kind of pointing toward a really good way to deal with this kind of really intense anxiety. And one of those is that, you very quickly understood what was going on, and that's not always the case for folks, especially with the first episode. I think it's incredibly common to go to the emergency room. And I think that's actually probably a good thing
Absolutely.
to do, because who knows, it could be cardiac related, it could be something else. It is a good thing to check out once or twice maybe, but not repeatedly. You don't need to keep doing it if you've had a really good, thorough assessment. But yeah, it's okay to do that initially. And then the other thing you said that I thought is a really good approach is to kind of talk yourself down in a sense. That we talk a lot in Joy Lab about the observing mind, which is very different from the mind that's caught up in whatever's going on. And this is a nice way to think about utilizing that. We're able to use our capacity to step back. There's part of our brain that can step back, see what's going on, not be so caught up in it and worried about it, and then kind of talk down the part of the brain that's feeling frantic and scared and everything else. And using language that, okay, I know what this is. This is just a panic attack. I am not going to die. This is not going to hurt me in a severe, incapacitating way. It's really super uncomfortable, but I can get through this and it will pass. And the first time you're going through it, you might not realize it's going to pass, but you will quickly learn that. And it's very helpful, very reassuring to have that ability to kind of soothe yourself with that kind of language.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's super effective. There's a lot of evidence to support that.
Well, I think it's worth saying that there is a very real sense in which anxiety and even panic anxiety is normal. It's how our bodies are designed. It's how we're built. And I think especially with what we're saying are anxiety attacks, that's probably a normal response, maybe an overreactive response, but it's still a normal response to being super stressed in one's life or carrying too much emotion that just has to get out. But a panic attack is also an absolutely normal mechanism, but that has gone wrong, so to speak. We're supposed to have a panic reaction when we are truly threatened, when our life really is at risk, but not out of the blue. And so that's sort of there's a glitch in the system, and it needs to be addressed because, a lot of people in what you just described, it will start with that one discrete, intense episode, but then it kind of grows, it kind of spreads. A good example is you were driving while this happened, and often people will be scared to drive again. They kind of associate that with what happened, even though it wasn't the driving that caused it, presumably. But, with anxiety, you don't want to let it get a foothold and spread like that. You want to do something to be able to pretty quickly disrupt the cycle of anxiety that otherwise can grow and take over more and more aspects of one's life. And that's something we want to try to avoid. It's just much easier to come back from it if it doesn't grow too much.
Yeah, there's something about befriending in a strange way that experience of having a panic attack and our anxiety, and giving some love back to ourselves. And then the practices we do here at Joy Lab.
That's right. It's a really good reminder that anxiety of this nature, even this intensity, is best approached by developing skills. This is something that we can learn how to manage effectively through creating just more effective mental and emotional skills, learning to tap into that observing self, learning to dissipate some of the energy that's building up in our body through movement or through relaxation skills or techniques, breathing. But a lot of what is helpful, especially with anxiety, is to really learn to work with our thoughts and with our emotions in more skillful ways, which is really the heart of what we're trying to do in Joy Lab.
Yeah, and we're happy you're here with us because we can do this together. I think before we close, there's just some simple wisdom that I want to share. It's kind of a little pithy statement that I turn to when I feel that expanding anxiety monster creep up, as you described, Henry, that one that has tentacles that wants to grab onto everything. And I don't actually have the source for this quote, so if anyone knows it, please comment over at YouTube or let me know. But here it is, and I hope it helps you also a little bit, invites some ease and lightness as well. Not everything that weighs you down is yours to carry.
Thank you for listening to the Joy Lab podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, visit joylab.coach to learn more about the full Joy Lab program. Be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Please remember that this content is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended to provide medical advice and is not a replacement for advice and treatment from a medical professional. Please consult your doctor or other qualified health professional before beginning any diet change, supplement, or lifestyle program. Please see our terms for more information.